My ex-boyfriend broke up with me claiming I didn't do enough around the house, then said, "You can move back in with your mom. I'm turning the guest room into my office." He forgot the house is mine, and watching his face when I reminded him was worth every second of the 6 years I wasted on this delusional parasite. Let me paint you the full picture of how spectacularly Finn managed to destroy his own life. I'm a senior financial analyst at a major investment firm, pulling in $180,000 annually, and I've been supporting this man-child for 6 years while he bounced between ridiculous passion projects. There was the YouTube channel where he was convinced he'd be bigger than PewDiePie despite never breaking 50 subscribers. The NFT craze where he swore he was ahead of the curve. Spoiler alert, he lost $15,000 of my money. His brief stint trying to make it big in crypto, where he managed to lose most of his remaining savings, which were also technically my savings, since I'd been funding his lifestyle. During all of this financial hemorrhaging, I held everything together. Mortgage payments of $2,800 monthly? Me. Utilities averaging $350? Me. Groceries, car payments, insurance, property taxes. Every single essential expense came from my accounts, while Finn worked on himself in what he generously called his office, but was really just a spare bedroom where he played Fortnite 16 hours a day. The audacity of this situation didn't fully hit me until that conversation 2 weeks ago. Finn had been acting increasingly strange, spending more time on his phone and making these philosophical comments about needing space to grow. I initially dismissed it as his usual pre-project rambling, but then he started critiquing the house maintenance with this weird, judgmental tone I'd never heard before. He'd point out unwashed dishes or unfolded laundry like he was some kind of household management expert, despite the fact that his biggest domestic contribution in 6 years had been reorganizing our bookshelf 3 times and throwing out my perfectly functional Tupperware because it didn't spark joy. When Finn sat me down at our kitchen table after I got home from a 12-hour day analyzing portfolio risk management, I expected another announcement about his next guaranteed-to-fail venture. Instead, he looked me dead in the eye and said, "I think we should break up. You don't do enough around the house." I actually laughed. The sheer absurdity of an unemployed man who hadn't contributed a dime to our household expenses in 3 years, accusing me of insufficient domestic contribution, seemed like performance art. But when he didn't crack a smile, something crystallized in my mind. This wasn't a joke. This was a calculated move. "You never clean up after yourself," he continued with stunning confidence. "I feel like I do all the emotional labor around here. I'm always the one who has to point out when things need to be done." Let me provide some context for this remarkable statement. I work 60-hour weeks managing investment portfolios worth $50 million. Sometimes I'm too exhausted to immediately wash dishes or fold laundry. Sometimes I leave my coffee mug on the counter or forget to put my shoes in the designated spot. But I also pay every single bill that maintains our standard of living, while Finn's biggest household achievement has been mastering the microwave settings. This is the same man who has a complete meltdown if the Wi-Fi disconnects for 5 minutes, yet somehow I'm the one who calls the service provider every single time. Every birthday, holiday, or weekend activity has been planned and funded by me. He won't even order takeout without asking for my input 3 times and still managing to get my order wrong half the time. But here's where the situation shifted from annoying to absolutely fascinating from a strategic standpoint. After his breakup announcement, Finn started behaving like he already owned the house. He made this smug comment about how this will be a good reset for both of us, and casually suggested I could move back in with my mom or find a nice apartment somewhere. He even started discussing his plans to convert the guest room into his dedicated office space and mentioned getting a dog since there won't be anyone around to complain about pet hair anymore. That's when the beautiful irony of his situation became clear. Finn had genuinely forgotten, or perhaps never truly understood, whose name appears on the deed to this house. Not his name. Not even close. This house was my inheritance from my grandparents, transferred to me 5 years before Finn even moved in. Every mortgage payment, every repair, every utility connection, every insurance policy, everything exists in my name alone. Finn has zero legal claim to this property and apparently zero awareness of this fundamental fact. As a financial analyst, I'm trained to assess risk and identify strategic advantages in complex situations. Sitting in that kitchen, watching Finn smugly plan his post-breakup life in my house, I realized I held every single card in this game. He had just voluntarily eliminated himself from the relationship, removed any moral obligation I had to support him, and was now operating under the delusion that he could simply take over my assets. I excused myself, went upstairs to my bedroom, and started calculating exactly how this would play out. Finn had no income, no savings, no legal rights to the property, and apparently no backup plan beyond assuming I'd quietly disappear. He just handed me the perfect opportunity to teach him an extremely expensive lesson about consequences. My strategic thinking kicked into high gear. As someone who manages complex financial portfolios professionally, I understand timing, leverage, and the importance of documentation. I wasn't going to argue with Finn or try to change his mind. Instead, I was going to let him dig himself as deep as possible into his fantasy scenario before reality crashed down around him. That night, I started documenting everything. Screenshots of our bank statements showing 6 years of me covering every expense. Copies of the property deed with only my name. Records of utility accounts, insurance policies, mortgage payments. A comprehensive financial paper trail proving Finn's complete dependence on my resources. I also reached out to my attorney, Marcus Whitfield, who I'd worked with on estate planning issues. As a partner at Whitfield & Associates specializing in property law, Marcus immediately grasped the legal implications of Finn's assumptions. He's essentially a tenant without a lease agreement, Marcus explained during our phone consultation. Since he's never contributed to mortgage payments or property maintenance, he has no equity claim. You can terminate his residency with proper notice, which in this case would be 30 days. But I didn't want to simply evict Finn. I wanted him to fully experience the consequences of his arrogance and financial irresponsibility. So I developed a more sophisticated approach. Over the next week, I watched Finn's behavior with fascinating detachment. He started acting like he'd already won some kind of victory, lounging around the house with increased entitlement and making pointed comments about how I should start, organizing my things for the transition. He even began referring to various rooms as if he'd already redecorated them in his mind. The situation reached peak absurdity when Finn announced he was having a friend over and needed me to respect his space. When the doorbell rang, I opened it to find an attractive woman named Mila, holding a bottle of wine and wearing the kind of smile that suggested this wasn't remotely a platonic friendship. Finn didn't even bother with introductions, just swept past me like I was hired help and began giving Mila a tour of his house. "This is the living room," he said with genuine pride. "I've been thinking about getting a modern sectional couch, something more contemporary." This from a man who'd never purchased furniture in his life. Nyat. The kitchen has this great open layout, perfect for entertaining. The kitchen he'd never cooked in. And this is my office space where I handle most of my business operations. The spare bedroom where he played video games while I funded his existence. Mila was thoroughly impressed, asking intelligent questions about the neighborhood and complimenting the interior design choices I'd made over 5 years of home ownership. Meanwhile, Finn was basking in credit for achievements and investments he'd had absolutely no part in creating. I had 2 options: explode immediately and reveal his deception, or maintain my strategic patience and let him build an even more elaborate house of lies. I chose patience. As a financial analyst, I understand that the bigger the bubble, the more spectacular the eventual burst. That evening, while Mila and Finn enjoyed what they clearly thought was their first romantic evening in his new bachelor pad, Finn pulled me aside with breathtaking audacity. "I think it's best if we work out a timeline for your departure," he said in the tone of someone offering a generous favor. "No rush, of course, but Mila and I need to start making some plans." "Don't worry about me," I replied with perfect calm. "I'm handling everything." His smug satisfaction was almost artistic in its completeness. He truly believed he'd orchestrated some masterful life upgrade, trading in his financially responsible girlfriend for a newer model while keeping all the assets I'd accumulated. The next morning, I implemented phase 1 of my response strategy. While Finn slept until noon as usual, I called Blackstone Security Services and had all the locks changed. Professional installation, complete with new deadbolts and updated security codes. The technician was efficient and discreet, completing the entire job in under an hour. I paid the $340 service fee from my checking account, the same account that had been covering all of Finn's living expenses for 6 years, and settled in with a cup of coffee to wait. When Finn finally emerged from the bedroom and strolled into the kitchen with his characteristic entitlement, I delivered the news with casual precision. "By the way, I had the locks changed this morning. You'll need to collect your belongings and vacate the premises by 6 p.m. today." The transformation in his expression was absolutely priceless. Complete color drain, followed by confused blinking, followed by the dawning horror of someone realizing they'd catastrophically miscalculated. "What do you mean you changed the locks?" he stammered. "You can't do that." "I absolutely can," I replied, maintaining perfect professional composure. "This is my house. My name is on the deed, the mortgage, and every utility account. You're not on any legal documents related to this property, and now you're not welcome here." What followed was a desperate progression through the classic stages of crisis management. First, denial. "This has to be some kind of joke." Then anger. "You can't just kick me out." Then bargaining. "I thought you loved me. I thought we were building something together." Mila arrived during the peak of his meltdown, probably expecting another romantic evening with her successful new boyfriend. Instead, she got to witness Finn frantically packing his gaming equipment while I stood nearby, arms crossed, reminding him not to forget his specialized gaming chair. The confusion on her face was almost as entertaining as Finn's panic. "Wait," she kept asking, "this isn't your house?" Finn couldn't even formulate a coherent response. By 6 p.m., both Finn and Mila were gone, and I was pouring myself an excellent glass of wine on the couch Finn had wanted to replace with his non-existent furniture budget. But the story gets even better. 3 days later, I received a call from our mutual friend Caleb, clearly fishing for information on Finn's behalf. When I pressed him directly, Caleb revealed the full scope of Finn's premeditated deception. Apparently, Finn had been planning this breakup for months, telling everyone in our social circle that he was about to take over the house and start a new chapter. He'd painted himself as a long-suffering boyfriend who'd put up with my inadequacies for years, and according to his version of events, the house was basically his because of all the work he'd put into making it a home. The lies were so elaborate, they were almost impressive. Finn had told people I was barely contributing to our expenses, and that he was the one holding everything together financially. This from a man who didn't even know our monthly mortgage payment amount. He'd also been downplaying every contribution I'd made while inflating his own minimal efforts into major life investments. Most remarkably, Finn had thrown himself a premature victory celebration, telling friends he was finally free to focus on his life, and actually making plans to host a housewarming party in my living room. He'd been so confident I'd simply roll over and surrender the house that he'd never even considered the possibility I might assert my legal rights. At this point, I could have simply let Finn fade into irrelevance and moved on with my life. But years of financial manipulation, emotional freeloading, and now this elaborate character assassination campaign had earned him a more comprehensive response. I decided to deploy my professional network and strategic thinking skills for a definitive conclusion to this relationship. First, I composed a detailed group message to our mutual friends, clarifying the actual facts of our situation. I kept the tone professional and factual, but included comprehensive documentation, screenshots of lease agreements and utility bills showing my name exclusively, a photo of the property deed with only my signature, bank statements demonstrating 6 years of me covering every household expense while Finn contributed nothing. The response was immediate and overwhelmingly supportive. Most people were shocked, saying they'd had no idea Finn was spinning such elaborate lies about our relationship dynamics. A few of his closer friends tried to defend him with vague comments about him. Going through a lot, but I shut that down quickly with specific financial data. Second, I contacted a local charity that helps people furnish transitional housing and donated all of Finn's remaining possessions. His old desk, the gaming chair he'd abandoned in his rush to leave, even some furniture he'd brought from his previous apartment. The charity was thrilled to receive everything, and I was delighted to see it go to people who would actually appreciate it. Third, I reached out to Finn's parents, who had always been kind to me and deserved to know the truth about their son's behavior. I didn't provide every detail, but I gave them enough information to understand that Finn's victim narrative was completely fabricated. The group message response was immediately volcanic. Finn found out within hours and called me furious, accusing me of ruining his life and claiming I had no right to air our dirty laundry. I calmly pointed out that he'd been doing exactly that for months. I'd simply corrected the public record with documented facts. Then I hung up and blocked his number. His parents' reaction was even more satisfying. They were horrified and apologetic, saying they'd had no idea Finn had been treating me so poorly. His mother even offered to reimburse me for some of the expenses he'd accumulated, but I declined. I wasn't interested in money. I wanted them to understand who their son really was. The final cherry on top of this entire situation came 2 weeks later when I encountered Mila at a coffee shop downtown. She approached me with obvious embarrassment and apologized for getting involved in such a messy situation. Then she delivered the most beautiful piece of information I'd heard all year. Finn was living in his car. Apparently, after learning the truth about his financial situation and housing status, none of his friends were interested in letting him crash on their couches. His parents weren't willing to enable his behavior by bailing him out immediately. He'd burned too many bridges with his lies and was now experiencing the direct consequences of his choices. Mila also mentioned that Finn had tried to convince her to be a character witness in some imaginary legal case he was building about his rights to the house. She'd laughed and hung up on him, which restored some of my faith in human judgment. But Finn still wasn't finished making his situation worse. A week later, my sister Nora called me with disturbing news. Finn had somehow gotten her contact information and fed her an elaborate sob story about how he'd invested everything in our relationship and was now homeless because of my vindictive behavior. He'd even showed her screenshots of bills he'd paid years ago, conveniently omitting the fact that he'd paid them with money from my accounts. The most shocking part? He'd asked Nora for $2,000 to get back on his feet and fight for what's rightfully his. And she'd given it to him. Before I could completely lose my mind, Nora explained her strategy. She'd made him sign a proper IOU with repayment terms, interest, and his car as collateral. I knew he was lying, she said, but I wanted documented proof of exactly how desperate he'd become. Plus, having a signed document showing he had to borrow money might come in handy later. My sister is brilliant. She'd essentially tricked Finn into creating legal evidence of his financial desperation, while also giving me additional ammunition if he continued his harassment campaign. The final confrontation came when I ran into Finn's mother at the grocery store. She looked exhausted and angry and immediately asked if we could talk privately. Over coffee, she revealed the full extent of Finn's recent behavior. He'd been sleeping in his car in their driveway, refusing to come inside unless they supported his delusional crusade to reclaim his home. Every morning he'd leave claiming to have meetings about getting the house back. Every evening he'd return with increasingly elaborate stories about his legal progress. The breaking point came when she overheard him trying to convince Mila to be a character witness about his ownership claims. Mila had laughed and hung up, but his mother realized Finn was never going to accept reality without serious intervention. She and Finn's father had made a final decision. They were changing their locks, cutting off his access to their Wi-Fi, and giving him one last choice. Accept a job offer from his uncle in another state, actual employment involving honest work rather than get-rich-quick schemes, or figure out his life completely independently. We're done watching him try to tear down other people's lives because he refuses to build his own, she told me. 6 months later, Finn took the job with his uncle and moved to Nebraska. According to his mother, he's finally working a real job and slowly paying back the money he owes, starting with the $2,000 loan from Nora. He's also required to attend counseling as a condition of his family's continued relationship. As for me, I've been promoted to senior portfolio manager with a $220,000 salary. I refinanced the house at a lower interest rate and used the savings to fund a European vacation. I also started dating Marcus, my attorney, who appreciates both my financial independence and my strategic thinking skills. The house that Finn thought he could simply take over is now worth $150,000 more than when I inherited it, thanks to improvements I've made with my actual income. Sometimes I sit on the deck he never helped build, drinking wine he never paid for, and think about how perfectly his arrogance destroyed his own life. He could have had a comfortable existence supported by someone who genuinely cared about him. Instead, he's working construction in Nebraska because he thought he was smarter than the woman who'd been subsidizing his fantasy lifestyle for 6 years. The lesson here is simple. Never underestimate someone just because you've been taking advantage of their generosity. And always remember that the person paying all the bills usually owns everything that matters.